Hi everyone, I had a request for a video showing some tips for cutting out your fabric so that your interfacing and your exterior fabric or your lining fabric as it may be will line up nicely at the edges. So if you take a look at this piece here, you can see that my interface and my lining are just perfectly lined up there. And the reason for that is because I almost always do what is known as block interfacing. Block interfacing is when you cut your interfacing to be bigger than the piece that you are going to cut. If you're cutting your interfacing and your material separately, layering them together and then fusing them, very often you will have some overlap because the edges will shift while you're fusing, or the pieces will not be cut to exactly the right size, not exactly the same size, and so you're not going to have that nice neat edge. Let me show you as an example. I have the Mini Betty pattern here, and I'm just going to cut this out just from my exterior fabric. Now, an important tip, regardless of which method you use, is to make sure you're pressing your fabric before you start. I also pre-wash all of my cotton-based fabrics so that if they're going to shrink, they do that in the wash and not under the heat press. When I'm cutting out my pattern pieces, I like to use pattern weights. I use metal washes. For straight edges, I use a ruler. And then for the curve, I like to switch to a smaller rotary cutter. And the other option, if you don't like to use a rotary cutter on curves, is to just draw in the line and then cut it with your scissors. So I've got my exterior piece cut out, and now I'm going to cut out my interfacing. Just digging through my scraps here, I take my interfacing piece, and then I attempt to cut that out as close to the pattern as I can, the same way as I did for my exterior fabric, making sure that I am cutting the glue side up, mirrored to the exterior fabric, although this pattern is symmetrical, so it doesn't matter. Cutting around that interfacing, and once that's cut to the size of the pattern, you lay that on, and then you go and fuse that in place. So you're going to smooth it out as best you can, and then go and fuse that according to the instructions on the particular type of fusible interfacing that you're using. I have fused my cotton to my interfacing, and you can see that even though I cut it very precisely around the pattern piece, the same pattern piece using the same technique, even when I have fused it, there's just a little bit hanging over the edge of my exterior fabric. Now, you can trim that, which is certainly a reasonable option. You can use the pattern piece to guide you as well. But I find block interfacing is just much easier than cutting your interfacing and your material separately and then trying to line it up. Let me demonstrate that for you. So for block interfacing, what you want to do is have a piece of your exterior that is bigger than the piece that you are cutting, and a piece of interfacing that is bigger than the piece you are cutting. And what you would do is pop your interfacing on, and then you will fuse that in place before you even worry about starting to cut your pattern piece. So lay your interfacing down, glue side to the wrong side of your material. Everything that needs to be pre-washed is pre-washed so that any shrinking has already taken place, and go and fuse that in place, making sure that there's no interfacing hanging off the edge so you don't get glue on your iron or your heat press. Once you have the interfacing fused to your material, you take your pattern piece, you're going to lay it on however you would normally cut it, and then you're going to cut around your pattern piece just once. And when you do so, you're going to have perfectly lined up edges. So same strategy, I'm just going to use my smaller rotary cutter. And then you can see for this one, you have perfectly neat edges, no overlap, and your interfacing is fused exactly where you need it to be. And the bonus is you only had to cut out your pattern piece once. And you're going to get a lot less fraying around the raw edges of your woven materials if you interface it before you cut it out. You can do your block interfacing using a big piece of material and have enough material and interfacing for your entire project that you need to cut out. Or you can do it on a smaller scale. If you're going to do it on a smaller scale, what you're going to do is take your exterior piece and your interfacing, and just roughly cut out the interfacing so that it is bigger than your finished pattern piece. So just roughly cut around. Again, as always, pre-shrunk and pressed. And then you place your interfacing piece on your exterior material, fuse that in place, and then once that's fused, you can cut out your pattern piece. Again, just the one time. If you're cutting curved pieces and that's something that you find challenging, you can do all of the straight sides, and then you can take a pen and draw in your curve, and then cut that out with scissors, making sure that you're cutting inside the line that you just drew. And then again, you have a piece that the edges line up nicely. A final option, and one that I use sometimes when I have a piece of material that I'm trying to use that is barely bigger than the piece that I am cutting out, such as the Pythagorean pouch on this piece of material here. Cut your interfacing to size, fuse it on to your exterior, and then cut it out around the edge of your pattern piece laid over the interfacing. That will give you the minimum amount of waste when it comes to your interfacing, and also allows you to use up smaller cuts of your exterior fabric for your finished pattern piece. So your options are: cut both your interfacing and your fabric separately, line them up, and then fuse them. Fuse a large section of interfacing to your material and then cut out all of your pattern pieces that you need. Cut around your pattern piece roughly from your interfacing and then fuse it to your exterior fabric, or cut your interfacing to the exact size, fuse that onto your material, and then cut around it. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.